Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the monastery, the open bar of the internet, the world's greatest shit show, and the place where we, the good brothers and sisters of this most holy of temples, seek enlightenment through the drunkest, craziest, and most batshit ways possible. I am your one and only gaming monk, better known as Mildra, and with me I have a newcomer into the temple, coming to us from Long Dog Games, another fellow resident of the greatest state in the lower 48 states, the madman behind Pericle, originally with Gathering Darkness, now coming back with Labyrinth. No David Bowie jokes, we've heard them all. The one and only Stephen Claypool. How you doing today, man?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it, Mildred.
Yep, I had to get the Bowie joke out of my system because, well, it probably has happened already.
I'll admit I don't know the joke.
But Bowie, from the movie Labyrinth.
Oh, I wish I had seen it. I haven't.
But
Darn. Okay, I'll have to check it out.
I'll I'll just add that to the pile. But a bit of a tradition around here is opening with the humble beginnings, in a sense. So, walk with me through your first introduction to role-playing games and what made it stick.
Oh, for me, well, I've been playing role-playing games since I was a kid, which is way back in the 1970s, with the earliest D&D, and loved it.
Hmm.
Later, when I had kids around 1990s, 2000, I introduced my kids to D&D, and they loved it. In fact, they loved it so much they wanted to play all the time. We play a lot of games, so I love tabletop games, and we play card games and social games and social deduction games and etc. But RPGs have always been our favorite. D&D's was our favorite. Later we were playing Pathfinder. But at any rate, my kids, when they were young, they wanted to play all the time, and I was a busy working dad and just couldn't be the DM for them all the time. So they started wanting to bring their friends to play, so we'd have multiple campaigns going. I just couldn't do it. So we decided we were going to invent a way that they could play without needing a game master. And we started with random encounters with dice charts, and eventually I built a software program that was primitive, but it would randomly generate dungeons for them to go through. And we tried doing that platform on D&D, but it doesn't work well, especially the oldest rules, which were very freeform and not really well defined. And you really need a human to be the judge of what's going to happen in that type of setting. So
Hmm.
over 20 years, we tried different systems and made adjustments. And over 20 years, we were just changing the rules to make it so it would be very clear without a human judge what the answer in various scenarios would be. So the focus was on clarity and being able to understand the answer to any type question that would come up.
Hmm.
And that allowed us to have the software tell the story and maneuver the foes, and you could still focus on tactics and gameplay. Anyway, it just grew over 20 to 25 years, and my kids got more of their friends to play. They eventually went off to college and came back, and next thing you know, they had their college buddies playing, and we had a pretty big group playing this game. My oldest son rewrote the software. We went through a couple versions so that people could load stories, and so they would do it in spreadsheets, and they would load adventures.
Hmm.
And it was just growing. And at one point in time, some of the people that were playing said, let's just publish this game because it's fun. We love it.
Hmm.
So we did. This started as a passion project a couple years ago. We decided we were going to see if the world was interested in this. I posted it on Facebook, and a lot of people were very interested. So we decided to do a Kickstarter and launch the game, and it's grown from there. So that's how we got to where we are today.
Hmm. Now, it's always funny when I see these board game projects or TTRPG board game hybrids, because there has been a certain discontent among some that that claim that certain games are taking too much from board games, which I always found hilarious because I'd say for the last 30 or so years we've had so many different examples of board games that are borderline RPGs, going all the way back to maybe Hero Quest.
Yep,
Oh,
love that game.
it's I'm not calling anybody out when when I say that kind of thing. It's more of a amusing contradiction. Uh, but it's but that's a whole other affair. Now, we talked about this a bit before we went live, but the name itself, which I unfortunately mispronounced while I was setting things up, um, Pericle, basically
Yeah,
like the
Pericle.
open Pericle.
Yeah, so
How did that name
can I?
come about?
Yeah. Well, to be honest, it was a roundabout way to change the name upon publishing as Pericle. We tried for a lot of different names, and um, it's very difficult to find a name that uses an established word that hasn't already been taken. So we tried, we were going to name it Ascendance, and we're going to name it Intrepid. And anyway, we went through a whole bunch of names, even getting close to having a final name, and then somebody else came out with a game and with the exact same name months before we announced the name. Finally, we were just a little bit tired of all the effort, so we decided we were going to pick a word from another language that would be unlikely to be used. So Pericle is from Romanian, and it means danger. We thought, hey, danger, that sounds kind of cool. That would be a cool idea. Let's use Pericle. So Pericle in Romanian means danger, and we don't have any tie to that language. It's just we thought that would be a name that has not been used by any game. And then in the creation, we spelled it incorrectly on accident. It turns out it's actually spelled differently in Romanian than the way we spelled it. But that's how we ended up with Pericle. It's a name that was available, and we thought it had a cool meaning, and so Pericle it is.
Hmm. Kind of reminds me of how there there was that rumor, as I suppose I'll call it, that the name Darth Vader lampshaded the twist in Empire Strikes Back because because Vader is Dutch for father, was the claim.
Ah, okay.
Except one, that's not the case. Two, the way Vader is spelt in Star Wars isn't um what the Dutch word for father would be written as. I'm not going to try and pronounce it because I don't speak Dutch. And three, according to Lucas, he just looked at a bunch of names in his yearbook and then picked one at random.
Oh, okay. But it's a good story.
Yeah, but I'm pretty sure that at some point he probably said, "Yeah, I lampshaded it ahead of time." Um, the whole fake it till you make it kind of thing.
Yep.
The whole this was always the plan. No, it wasn't.
Yeah. I
But
know he had a big long-term plan laid out, but I'm sure it changed very significantly and was invented as he was going because that's how things really are.
um, well, the whole father thing that only happened because he felt he had written himself into a corner, and when introducing too many characters, and like the original one of the original drafts was a complete mess. Um, the but getting past that, you've described Pericle as a hybrid of role playing game and board game focused on the web app that uses the Lore Master. And since it
Right.
is built on a kind of choose your own adventure style, I am a bit curious if when you had started out and cutting your teeth in tabletop gaming, if you had dipped into choose your own adventure style books, whether it be through that of the same name or even game books like Lone Wolf or Fighting Fantasy.
Oh, yeah. Well, good questions. Let me answer just the sort of the first part, which is the description of Pericle, being sort of a hybrid between an RPG game and a tabletop game, because I think that is a good way to describe it. I'll just go ahead and say before I get to your choose your own adventure question, what we want it to feel as much like a role playing game as it can be. That's been our goal.
Hmm.
We want people to feel like they are playing a hero or a party of heroes that are going through an adventure and they're playing a role as heroes in this adventure. We want them to feel like they're part of a story, that they in a world, that they're immersed in. We want them to have control over building their hero. So we're trying to get it to feel like a role, like an RPG, like a more classic RPG, like D&D.
Hmm.
Truth, without a game master, it's a little hard to do that. It is prescribed with a software system a little bit more. It's a little more constrained with the rule system. It has to be because you can't have the computer ad hoc change what's happening to match the mood and the play like sometimes DMs will do.
Hmm.
So it does have a lot of focus on tabletop mechanics. That's just the way it is. And for that reason, if you wanted to play this game because you're really looking for a true RPG experience, you'll get a lot of it, but not all of it. And you have to realize it's also got a lot of elements that make it more like a sort of a dungeon crawl game with battle mechanics and tactics, and it's kind of halfway between the two. So that's how I would sort of describe it. That's halfway between the two. But I think over time, as we continue to improve Lore Master, our goal is to get it to feel even a little bit more RPG. Like we haven't quite had the capacity to finish all our features that we have planned that would make it feel a little bit more freeform and open. But anyway, that's just to respond to your first comment. Your second comment about the choose your own adventure style. I'll answer your question about my background, but just to explain Lore Master a little bit. So there's really sort of two ways that Lore Master runs. The first is telling the story, and in doing so, we use video and art, but also because video and art is expensive, there's spots where you read, and that combination tells the story. But then you come to a decision, and that has to be choose your own adventure. And when you make a choice, it progresses the story. Our goal, by the way, is that you're not just picking choices. We try to make the majority of the choices feel like a real decision that you might debate or that might be a dilemma to foster. The goal is when there's a choice there, it fosters discussion, so that you get more engaged in what's going on. That's one of our goals as we put it together. But yeah, it has to be choose your own adventure in terms of progressing the story. Sometimes the choices don't really matter in truth, but you don't know whether they will. Sometimes they matter and completely change a part of the story. Sometimes they just maybe change the odds of getting through an encounter, or the difficulty, or if you don't choose wisely, or you do choose wisely, or the reward. But at any rate, it's choose your own adventure. But there's a second part of Lore Master that is focused on combat, and in that format, the Lore Master is working the bad guys, but it does not have any awareness of what's going on in the map. It doesn't know where the humans and the bad guys are. I mean, the heroes and the bad guys are on the map, and so you interact with it by labeling the bad guys in Lore Master with what's happened to them. That maybe they fell down or that they're under a spell, and that then changes their tactics. They respond to what's the tactical conditions on the map. So each bad guy is programmed with a series of logic to react to the circumstances. So the evil wizard will respond with a really smart play, and the dumb zombie will just walk over a hazard to get to you. But at any rate, that format, that mode, is not a choose your own adventure. It's a reaction to what's being played on the map. People move, they roll dice, and they move standees around on the board just like any other tabletop.
Yeah.
I'm kind of blathering, but I was about to get to your question about how did we end up with choose your own adventure. And it's really because this is the easiest way to design It's not because I kind of came from a past history of focusing on the games that you mentioned. I haven't played either of them. It's really because I think this is the style that works best in
Hmm.
software. And RPG. I don't want to compare it to the game to a software RPG game because it's really a tabletop game. But classic software RPGs will have a choose your own adventure style because it works well for advancing the story.
Hmm. Now, when given how combat is very much on on these hex-based modular boards, and the fact that you have a role master, not role master, lore master, old habits, and the way that works, how how do you have how do you have combat set up as far as the enemy actions? Is it a case where there's like a random table in a kind of soft AI approach? Is it a case where there's specific actions that the lore master is going to have listed, like move to the nearest hero or something like that? How is it going to work?
I'm of both. So we'll talk about Gathering Darkness first, which is our first campaign that we released. It's a full story that will take the average game playing group, depending on how much you play, and but maybe up to a year. If you play a lot, you could be done in much less than that. But but you advance your hero from the beginning to the end, and it takes a lot of gameplay. And in that story, there are a lot of combat encounters that you'll run into, and each has a goal. We an objective that you're trying. Sometimes it's just to vanquish the bad guys. At other times, it might be to escape, or get out to the other side of the map. So in each of those scenarios, the bad guys that are in there have been programmed to do something, and part of their programming is fixed. Maybe they're going to pull this lever to try to cause a trap to open under your feet, but they only do it if somebody's in a certain area. Um, and if you aren't in that area, they'll do something else. But it might be pre-programmed to conditions on the map, or based on activities that the heroes have taken. And then there's a random element too, so that you can't metagame the system. I'm going to play this adventure through the second time, and I know what he's going to do, and then he does something a little bit different. So there might be a list of 3 different things a bad guy might do in a certain circumstance, and it's randomly determined. So there's a little bit of mixture of both. So some pre-programming and some randomized nature to it. And some for bad guys that are quite unusual, monsters that you may not understand. They might even react with something you didn't see coming. You didn't realize they had the ability to suddenly leap in the air and land somewhere. And so, that's by design. One of the goals is that, each combat encounter has an interesting challenge to solve and maybe a surprise that forces you to adjust your tactics.
Hmm.
So, that's with Pericle Gathering Darkness, which was a full-fledged story that we wrote, a really extensive story. It's got 500,000 words in size, so it's like the size of a Harry Potter book with lots of art and lots of encounters. It's depending on your choices, you see different options are available to you, and you go through different parts of the path. So people that have finished it, that have been die-hard fans, are playing it through multiple times to try to do different choices. But it's still somewhat programmed out. So our next offering is called the Labyrinth, and we're intentionally, before we release another adventure like Gathering Darkness, which we are working on already, but that takes a lot longer. We're releasing the Labyrinth because the Labyrinth is essentially built on the software that we've been using for 20 years, so we can get it to market a lot sooner. And in the Labyrinth, the encounters are randomly determined. However, there is a lot of variety in each, in that there's an objective for each. That it's not just you open the door and fight a bad guy. There's themes and challenges with each, and in those, the bad guys respond, and their actions tend to be more random, though, than that makes sense relative to the encounter. But if you play the encounter once and then a couple months later you happen to run into the same one that has been randomized in another labyrinth encounter, the bad guys are much more likely to do something a little bit different. Um, still, they behave according to their intelligence and the circumstances on the map. And you can imagine something with animal intelligence behaves very different than an evil, smart bad guy, versus a mindless bad guy.
Hmm. Now, with that in mind, when it sounds like what you're describing is that Gathering Darkness was meant to be more of a more of an adventure, more of a story arc, whereas Labyrinth could be described as episodes.
Yes. With Labyrinth, just very specifically, one of the focuses I want to build a hero, and a lot of people are having a lot of fun with our hero creation system because it's classless, which it means you're not constrained to I'm a wizard. These are the weapons that I can use and the spells I can get. Any hero can learn any spell or any discipline if they have the prerequisites, and they can use any weapon. And so you can mix and match any combo of weapons and spells, which allows you to be really creative. Because of that, people are loving the concept of trying to build different hero types in all kinds of creative ways, and they need to get experience points to do so, and they love trying the challenge in combat of their creations that they've made to see how they work. And so Labyrinth is well suited for that. It randomly will create a maze that you have to get through, and there's a story behind the Labyrinth that people come from far away to attempt to go through the Labyrinth, and they enter it and they get locked in there, and then it's a different experience for each crew that enters, and the goal is to find an exit through this maze. On average, it'll end up being about 5 different puzzles or traps or combat encounters before you manage to escape, if you escape. And that could vary based on whether you make the right choices or not. But in that mode, the encounters that are assembled are randomized. They are, from a large library, and the variation factor means you can go through it over and over. And it also is configured to how advanced your heroes are, which you describe when you enter. So it'll be a very different experience for beginning heroes versus advanced heroes, which is why it has so much replayability. And anyway, that's why we've been playing that game, as it was designed for a long time, actually, in my gaming group. And so anyway, hopefully I answered your question. It is a little bit less story focused and more focus on the enjoyment of creatively building my hero and trying out these different challenges and seeing if I can get through the thrill and the adrenaline of surviving the labyrinth. If you do, you can throw your character back in again and try to keep leveling them up.
Mm-hmm.
And you go through it over and over again.
Now, speaking of heroes, I want to touch on that. Now, you've described it as classless hero creation, and going classless is a double-edged sword in a lot of games. Yes, it can provide a lot of freedom, but it also is a little bit of a higher floor because of the fact that a lot of classless designs have a fair amount of traps in some cases, and in other cases, you're dealing with analysis paralysis, where people are worried if the point spend that they put in now is going to screw them over a few sessions down the road.
Yep.
So how do you maintain that same freedom, that same appeal of classless, while also keeping to the very simple, very straightforward design of your game?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I do want to emphasize, the straightforwardness of it allows you to create a hero with much less effort than in a typical RPG game. Like, it takes quite a while to make a D&D or a Pathfinder or hero. It just it takes a long time. You can make a hero in this game much faster. Not that there's any less creative design. There's probably more, in fact, because you have so many choices. But there aren't as many things to fill out. So you get to your building it. You spend more time coming up with fun ideas, and then quickly creating it, then you're ready to go and play. In terms of the balance has been one of the most important things we have focused on, and we have spent hours and hours with spreadsheet formulas to have a mathematical way to assess the power of every component of the game and to assign an appropriate experience point purchase for each component so that each it's well balanced. And then we've been playtesting it for a long time, and there are some elements we haven't released still because we don't want to release it unless we're confident it's balanced. I think the balance is quite strong. I think you can go with almost any combo that you want, and you won't break the game with something that's too strong, and you won't create a complete failure of a character either. It's just that I think we have the balance that's quite good. I will say we have less experience when heroes get to be really advanced and very powerful, and there's some possibility we need to do some fine tuning to keep the balance right at that highest level. But at any rate, you're right that it's a big challenge, and my answer is we've made a really big part of our focus over the years to not break that balance.
Hmm. So, with that in mind, one of the elephants in the room when it comes to creating characters in fantasy settings is, of course, the magic question, or rather, the magic and martial question. And the reason I phrase it like that is there's a bit of a bad habit in a lot of fantasy games, especially ones that are drawing upon a certain ubiquitous fantasy game, or litigious fantasy game as we call it here in the Temple, to have it that the martial characters are very simple mechanically, and the magic characters are the system mastery kind of characters that end up having a whole lot more options and versatility, as opposed to the one-trick pony that is a lot of martial characters. Um,
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that you can choose to make a hero in any path simpler by only choosing to focus on one thing throughout its development over and over again, and it doesn't matter whether you're focusing on martial or spell. You could choose a build that keeps it simple without a lot of choices, if that's what you were interested in. On the other hand, as you build your hero in our game Pericle, you can build it in such a way that you have a lot of choices, and this doesn't matter whether you're going through a martial route or a spell casting route. So, for example, if I wanted to make a hero that is using weapons, I can choose multiple different weapons, and I can choose different disciplines that determine what they can do with those weapons that ultimately give me lots of different choices.
mhm.
Plus, any hero can also learn a spell. So when you think you're going down the path of making a martial weapon and you suddenly realize, well, it'll be so much better if I get this one spell, you can learn that spell. And it's not really true that a hero is a martial hero or a spell casting hero. Um, Players that desire a certain archetype that is commonly known from so many different fantasy games can easily build that archetype. So if you want to have an archer, you get a bow and you get disciplines that help you shoot. If you want to be a cleric type character, you focus on trying to help heal. If you want to be a druid type character, you can take disciplines that make you good with nature or spells. But the truth is, you can mix and match them any way possible, and no matter what your original route, you can end up with the amount of choices in terms of gameplay and complexity based upon how many different things you focus on. And just so I'll just explain it a little bit more. In this game, there's no levels. You don't gain levels. Just when you're experiencing story successes or combat successes, you get experience points, and at any point in time you can spend your experience, and you can spend your experience to increase your base abilities, your might or your dexterity or knowledge. You can spend your experience points to increase your skills. so you're better at things like sneaking or climbing. You can spend your experience points to learn a new discipline, or to learn spells, or to buy things like a karma, which allow you to reroll. And you can do it at any point in time and in any order that you want. And so if you buy a wide variety of disciplines and spells, you're going to have a lot of choices. If you instead focus on increasing your might, you'll be a stronger hero with more hit points. But you can take whatever path you want, and it's fairly even no matter what. And again, to answer your very first question, the complexity or simplicity is not based on whether you're choosing spell or martial. It's really just on how many different things you want to focus on in your build out.
So, one of the concepts I've talked about quite a bit in these interviews and on various shows on this channel is all roads lead to Rome. All roads lead to Rome is a concept that there is a certain die resolution or a certain resolution mechanic that many of the mechanics spring outward from. Whether this be the D10 die pool that you'd see in every World of Darkness game, whether this be the more Yahtzee style die that you see in Weapons of the Gods, or even the blackjack style approach that you see in Fading Suns. There's always that one mechanic that's the core whenever someone's trying to do something that may succeed or may fail. What would be that Rome in this instance for Pericle?
Well, I would say that the Rome is not quite as fixed as a Rome. In other words, a single sort of path that you're going to, but it's a little bit broader than that. And so to answer your question about the die system, so in Pericle we have an action die system. It's a 10-sider. You roll this 10-sided die anytime you're choosing an action, and what we wanted to do is, again, I said that part of the focus on the game is making it so that I don't need somebody to help me decide if I'm successful or not, because we don't have a game master. So on this die, half of the faces have a success icon. And if you roll and you get a success icon, you're successful. Your action is successful 50% of the time, and it's really easy to know whether you're successful or not. If you roll that, you're successful. The other 5 times, one of them is a failure icon, and the other 4 are numbers 1 through 4. And for the numbers 1 through 4 determine whether you're successful or not, in that your scores for achieving any action end up being a number from 0 to 4, and based upon whatever action you're taking. Let's say that you're attempting to push over a statue and you use your might score. If your might score is a 2, you have to roll a 1 or a 2 to be successful,
So
or a
it's an
success. It would be a 7, right? It would be 5 of them are success, a 1 is a success, a 2 is success. So you'd have a 70% chance of pushing that statue over,
So it's
right?
an aim
And
low.
aim low, I said. I thought you said 8 or low.
No.
Correct. It's aim low. Yeah. So because if your might's a 3, you're aiming for 3 or lower. 4 is 4 or lower. If you look like if you're a stats guy, that means you basically have between a 50% and a 90% chance of almost any action, whether you basically are rolling a 0 or a 4. And game theory is that when people do things in a game, they want to be successful more often than they fail. So we wanted the stats to be in that target. You should be successful more than you fail, because that's more fun. And in the range of 50 to 90 is what you want. You want to have a chance of failing. So we basically engineered the system that our success chances fall between 50 and 90, and it's really fast and easy to determine. Okay, so I'm getting to your Rome thing. There's within that 50 to 90, there is no target that everybody aims for. The hero that is successful 90% of the time, and if it's an attack, their odds are that their impact is going to be less, whereas the person that is successful 50% of the time is going to have a much bigger effect when they're successful, but the two end up roughly evening out in terms of the...
I do want to clarify. With the description I was giving with Rome, I didn't intend to mean that everybody's aiming for a certain amount.
I see. Yep.
But that there
Got
is a certain die type a certain resolution formula that is that is the most common use. You know,
Got it.
in in something like D&D, it's D20 plus modifiers versus difficulty class,
Got it.
and
Yep.
you're trying to get over that difficulty class. In
Yep.
Fading Suns, it's attribute plus skill. You're trying to roll under the sum, but get as close to that sum as possible without going over. Hence, D20 blackjack. It
Got it.
sounds like in this case it's D10, and you're trying to get under your
Correct.
particular attribute.
Yep.
Which
Exactly.
the natural follow up would be: are there any is one? Do you some games treat the 10 in a D10 as a 0, some treat it as a 10. Where do you fall into that category?
Well, it's not a D10 and it doesn't have a zero or on it. It has five faces that are a successful, one unsuccessful, and the numbers 1 through 4. So, so that that's how it is. And it is a roll under system. So yeah, I guess that's the way it is. There are modifiers that can change it. So you can fall below 50%. You can run into a scenario where you have to be successful twice in a row in order to be successful, or three times. So it's uncommon though. Usually we're in the 50 to 90%.
Yeah.
Again, our goal is, in a lot of systems, you roll and you roll a 12 and you have to add a number 6 and do some math. I have an 18 and you have to ask the DM, did this succeed? And only the DM can tell you, and then he or she might have to do a little math and give you an answer back. And we want to relieve all that work of doing calculations and just focus on, was I successful or not, so I can spend my energy on tactics and not, and have the game flow really quickly. By the way, that one of the focuses of this game is, try to make the setup is really fast and easy. You can set up the game in 5 minutes and take it down. Every map is, you don't have to find fiddly bits and put them on the map. The goal is you just grab the map, everything is ready to go and pre-drawn on the map. The dice system is easy. Lore Master is fast and easy to get going. Our goal is you can set up, play, get meaningful results in 30 minutes or so, and then stop playing and take it down and play again in 2 days. Just in my busy life earlier, that's what led to this type of system, and it's one of its strengths. And that's also why we have the dice system that we have. Then we want the focus to be on on my tactics and my build and the story, and not in trying to understand mechanics and figuring out if something worked or didn't work.
Mm-hmm. So, with that said, because I did look at some of the videos that you had on on the channel. Um, one particular concept I was curious about is how exhaustion would work. Is that a case of the equivalent of mental damage, or is it a case where there's certain attacks that are going to do damage to exhaustion instead of doing damage to HP? How is it going to work?
Yeah, so basically, you can lose hit points in the normal manner, which is you get wounded and lose hit points.
Mm-hmm.
But you can also lose hit points in the form of exhaustion, and through other mechanisms, the most common one being from a spell, but it could be a magic item, it could be a circumstance, and they're hit point loss, just like hit point loss from being wounded. So in this system, when you cast a spell, the spell drains your hit points in the form of exhaustion. And so you have to be careful about how many spells you want to cast, because that can, lead, can be dangerous. The difference between exhaustion and hit point damage is that exhaustion is recovered much more quickly. So I'm trying to think of some of the other, I think this used to be called subdual damage in some of the earlier RPG systems. I think today they have different names for it, but it's sort of similar to that. It's hit point loss, but you do recover it more quickly when you're able to rest.
Mm-hmm.
In this game,
Mm-hmm.
heroes never get, because there aren't levels. In a lot of games, you level up and you suddenly get 10 more hit points, and over time you eventually have 200 hit points. In this game, you can end the game with just a few more hit points than you started with. When you're powerful enough to fight dragons, you still are only one, lance that's a critical hit away from dying, because you might only have 18 hit points at the end of the game.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, that creates an element of there's always risk, so you have to not make a major mistake. Um, but that also means the exhaustion that we were just talking about is more impactful. Losing a few hit points matters when you don't have very many. So uh, one of the limits of casting spells or using a magic item is care in managing your hit points.
Yeah. Now, the next thing I wanted to ask is definitely going to be in line with with combat, and that is how attacks work. We've already kind of gone into how how the basic die roll works, but with attacks, is it a case where you're rolling that d10 and checking it against a relevant stat? Or are you checking it against a different target number? How is it gonna work?
Yeah.
Just in
You're
terms of
so
hitting.
Yep. So good question. So it's an action. So as an action, you roll the action die, and you have to roll a target is successful, or you have to roll under a number, and that number is dependent upon your attack. So it might be that if you're focusing on being a good archer, you have taken disciplines that increase the likelihood that you hit if you're using a bow. So perhaps with your bow, you hit on an AD of 3. We call it AD for action dice. So that means if you roll a 3 or under, you're successful with your bow. But if you haven't been working with your secondary weapon, which let's just say it's a mace, and you pull that out, you may not be very good with your mace, and maybe you hit on a 0 or a 1 because that's not the focus of your hero. So there is a target number, and that target number is dependent upon your particular attack, which is dependent upon how you're building your hero. It varies by weapon, and it's true for spells too. Casting a spell is the same, so you have to roll under an AD number to be successful with your spell. If you're focused on being better at spell casting, you might have a higher number there, or a lower number. Some heroes, even if it's their focus, they might choose, I really just want to focus all my energy on doing as much damage with my attack as possible. I'm not going to increase my success rate. My success might still be rolling at AD 0, which means I'm only successful when I get a target. But because I spend energy creating my hero to have a big effect, when I am successful, it's going to do more damage or have a bigger uh, some other conditional result. So anyway, long story short is the you're rolling always against the AD system, and it varies based on the hero and the attack that they're choosing to do.
Mm-hmm.
That's
So,
also true for out of combat things. So you might be haggling with a merchant to get a better deal on something you're buying in the market, and that's making a persuasion check, which is a skill, and you're going to roll the action die, and it's dependent on how good you are at persuasion, and also how hard it is to persuade the bad guy. I didn't describe it, but you also have to add or subtract to the AD target based on circumstances. So if you're in the story and you did something to offend the merchant, but you still want to haggle with them, you might have to, lore master might tell you have to subtract 2 from your target. So normally if you're successful on a 2, it's -2 because you offended them, and you're only successful on a 0. Whereas if you had made story choices that make him your friend, maybe you get +1 or 2 on your attempt, and so when you attempt, you're more successful. But regardless of what type of action you're doing, you always roll that action die in this game.
mm-hmm. Now, I kind of hinted at the magic question, but in a lot of games, magic usually has some sort of limited resource that a mage has to take into account, whether it be spell charges in more litigious role-playing games, or an MP system, or even running the risk of something going wrong, like in say Warhammer. Do you have anything like that with the spells in Pericle,
Well,
or is it a case where spells are just a different type of action, much like disciplines?
it's a different type of action, but no, the big uh, resource you have to manage with spell casting is the exhaustion. So exhaustion, when you cast a spell, it has an exhaustion cost, which is a hit point drain, and so your rate limiting use of that spell is probably going to be your hit points. And in this game, in a lot of games, it's very easy to heal. So after a combat, you just drink a bunch of healing potions or cast healing spells or whatever, and you're back to full health. In our game, there's really more of an attrition around hit points. It's healing is not so easy to come by, and so for even exhaustion, you're not going to recover it until you can get to an inn and have a full night's sleep. So. So the biggest resource with spellcasting is managing your hit points and making a decision. Does my party really need help from the spell, or should I instead choose not to cast it and I'll shoot my bow instead, even though I'm better with my spell, but I want to preserve my hit points. And especially like in the Labyrinth, so that's what we're releasing. You're going to try to escape through this dungeon that you've been locked into. You're not going to get a chance to heal up very well, so you've got to manage what you have. So you may choose not to cast a spell, even though it would be helpful, because you want to preserve your hit points. And surviving to get out of the Labyrinth when one of your heroes has become significantly wounded, either because they cast too many spells or because they've been hurt, frequently changes party tactics, because maybe now the guy that's normally up front because he has a lot of armor is going to move to the back because he's really wounded and pull out a bow or borrow a bow from one of the other heroes, and the guy that's usually in back casting spells decides he has to take the role for the party of moving to the front, and that's kind of a fun strategic thing that happens in this game. So, again, to answer your question, the biggest impact of managing your spells is managing your hit points, and the way you choose to do that has a lot of ramifications for team strategy, just for survival.
I can get that. Now, with that in mind, I'd like to put the character creation kind of to the test, just to see if this just to see how one would handle this kind of thing. I know that there's some pre-gens within the rule set,
Yes.
but there's a few archetypes that have been used in different fantasy games that I'd like to see how they'd be handled if someone wanted to build them within your system.
Okay.
And
Yep.
given you're my moniker, I have to go with this one. How would one build a monk or something like a monk archetype?
Monk. Yeah. Great. So in this game, the way you build a hero is you have 5 points when you start. So we're starting from scratch, and you have 5 points to distribute between might, dexterity, and knowledge. The points you put in might will determine how many hit points you have and how much damage you do. The points you put into dexterity will determine how likely your attack actions are successful. The points you put into your knowledge will determine what type of spells and disciplines you can learn and how advanced they are. You only have access to certain spells or disciplines if your knowledge is limited. So you'll first make a decision. I'm going to build a monk. Now, even within the monk realm, you could be a big, strong monk and put it in might, or maybe you want to be more agile and not so much in might but more in dexterity, or maybe you want to be a monk that just really knows a lot of things, a lot of techniques. It's the wizened monk, and you're not necessarily going for might or dexterity, you're going for knowledge. In any of those scenarios, you can come up with a monk. So there's a lot of flexibility. So now, after I've chosen whatever combo of abilities I want, I will have experience points remaining from my start build to choose disciplines. If I'm gonna, or spells, but disciplines will be a little more relevant for a monk. So there's disciplines for martial combat, unarmed combat. There's disciplines that make you better at grappling. In this game, when you grapple, you tackle your foe, and the two of you fall prone in the same hex, and you lose your weapons, and you're basically tangled up in a pile, punching each other. And so you can build your monk to be grappling. You can build your monk to be punching. You could build your monk to have defensive fighting abilities. You can choose disciplines that allow you to attack multiple times or not. So it all depends on which of those paths you want to choose, and you would see a different result based also on the combo that you chose for choosing might or dexterity. So again, the build where you have more knowledge, you're going to have more of those discipline choices that give you the flexibility to grapple or, you know, attack multiple times with your fists and feet. If you want to instead put more of it in might, you will be hitting a little bit harder and having more hit points, but not having as many things that you've learned. But you can build a hero that is monk-like, and to throw in some pizzazz along the way, you're probably going to want to choose some spells that make it easier to do what you're doing. You know, whether it is a spell to cause a foe to fall prone, so that you can easily jump into his hex where he's prone and grapple him, because if that's what you're good, you might find that that spell is a really successful one for building a monk.
Hmm. So another one that I'd like to dip into, because this is one that a lot of games have been trying to chase and a lot of players have been trying to chase, and that is the Gish. Now, the idea of the Gish of somebody who's good at both fighting and at casting is a very broad net to cast. So I'll lean a little bit more specific into someone who channels their spells through their weapons, much in the same way as the Magus in Pathfinder, for one example.
Yep. So you can build a hero that attempts to do lots of things, and in doing so, you'll have a lot of options. It being building the hero that is able to do a lot of different things. You're not going to be as good as a hero that's focusing on only one of those. So your martial attack will not be as strong as somebody who's focusing only on martial attacks. Your defense will not be as good as a hero only focusing on defense, and same with your spell casting. But you can certainly your overall value to the party may still be just as good, because you end up being pretty good in every sort of circumstance. But it's very viable to build a hero that can do a lot of different things, including doing both martial and spell casting. Now, in terms of your very specific thing, we actually have a discipline. That's called Spell Strike. If you learn the discipline Spell Strike, it allows you to make a melee attack with a weapon, and upon success, immediately on the same turn cast a spell. And so you can specifically try to build that hero where you're attacking and casting a spell at the same time. Or you can choose to have a both martial and spell casting hero without that ability. Maybe separately, I'm casting range spells, and then once I get close, I'm just attacking, and the two activities are separated from each other. But I'm building my hero in a way that I can do both of them. There are a lot of options. I mentioned before that the system is very creative in terms of building heroes. You can build a hero that is straddling both martial and spell casting, or you can focus on one and only one.
Hmm. I can certainly get that. Now, with that in mind, what would you be shooting for as far as a release window for Pericle?
So for our upcoming Kickstarter, I
Yes.
think you're mean. So it takes a while this game we wanted to get to the market sooner, and we will. It still takes quite a while to have your game manufactured in China and completed, and which you have to manufacture in China these days to be competitive price wise, and get on a boat and come over to the United States and put in a warehouse and etc. We are giving ourselves a year because that's safe. I want to get it to the market as soon as possible. With luck, we have it in people's hands, the Labyrinth, by the end of this year. That would be my goal. Um, our Gathering Darkness is already out there. That's the first release, which is the adventure, so that's available now. But yeah, for Labyrinth, which is our next product, it will. That's the time frame. I think on the Kickstarter, we're saying that we will release it in a year.
Yeah, I can certainly get that. And with that said, I do want to sincerely thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to come all the way to my temple and enjoy the madness that happens here.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that you reached out to me, and it was a good interview. So thank you. Appreciate your time.
And anytime you see fit to return, the door is always open. As I often say
Great.
around here, drinking is not mandatory, but it is encouraged.
Well, thanks, Mildred.
And of course, a sincere thanks goes out to everyone who took the time out of their schedule to come onto the show and enjoy the madness. And there will be plenty more where that came from, as there always is here on the open bar of the internet. But until then, on behalf of the good brothers present and not present, my name is Mildra. I am your gaming monk. Stay fucking frosty, everybody.